Anytime. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning from New York. Anytime. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning from New York. And now our coverage continues on the Fox News channel on cable, and John Bolton, former U.S. Ambassador at the UN, Fox is contributing with me now. And sir, good morning yet again. Sum it up. What did you think?
This was the best speech of the Trump presidency, in my view. I think he was as clear and direct as it's possible to be. You listed a number of the key points that he made. I think the centerpiece of the speech was the criticism of the behavior of North Korea and Iran. And I think it's safe to say, in the entire history of the United Nations, there has never we will have no choice but the total destruction of North Korea. I think people will remember that. And he made what I think is a key point when you look at what our next steps might be. He said, denuclearization is the only acceptable future. And that means, in his view, we don't end this present crisis with North Korea still in possession of a nuclear weapons and ballistic missile program. On Iran, he was just as direct, as you mentioned, his criticism of the behavior of the regime toward its own people. And then he came, of course, to President Obama's nuclear deal with Iran and said, as he has said many times before, it's one of the worst, most one-sided deals in American history, an embarrassment to the country, and we haven't heard the last of it. I think these are about as clear an indication as a president can make that he's not going to live with the kinds of half measures and compromises that, frankly, for 25 years have marked American policy and led us to the present desperate situation where both these countries are on the verge of getting deliverable nuclear weapons. There's a long list of other things in here. I have to say, my favorite came at the end, and it may have been the most shocking thing he said in the context of the United Nations, talking about Venezuela. He said, this is not a case of socialism being poorly implemented. It's a case of socialism being implemented exactly the way the theory tells us. And I tell you, there are a lot of people in the UN who have never heard anything like that from an American president. So, as I said at the beginning, I think this was an outstanding speech, and I think it will serve the president very well.
It may serve him well. Does it serve the UN body in any way that's different than prior? Does he move the meter on any of the issues that are so important to you in this administration, sir?
Well, I'm a skeptic when it comes to UN reform, but I tell you, the only way to deal with the quagmire that the UN represents on so many issues is to be direct. You know, for Americans, plain speaking is still a virtue. And there was a lot of plain speaking in that speech.
I thought the way he framed the Poles and the French and the Brits and how they have fought for their own independence and their own freedom and their own values at the end there. I mentioned the question he said, are we still patriots? Sir, thank you for your analysis. John Bolton there with us here in New York City. And your time today. I want to get back to Shannon right now for more on this. Shannon.
All right, let's bring in Florida Congressman Ron DeSantis, a Republican on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And Congressman, welcome. Your reaction to the speech, especially given that you have been a big proponent for making sure that Israel is treated differently, and this administration has done that within the UN, a very different tone.
Well, I thought it was a tour de force, Shannon. This is the international UN version of draining the swamp. He went in there. He was extremely blunt, both about the failures of the UN, but also challenging them to actually be productive for a change. You know, last year, the UN, they did 24 resolutions. 20 of them were against Israel. So I think that's exactly the message that needed to be sent. Ambassador Bolton pointed out, very direct about the problems of North Korea and the Rocket Man, and then Iran and the terrible nuclear deal. But one of the things that really struck me was he provided a resounding defense of the nation state as kind of the core actor in international relations. And that's something that his predecessor, Barack Obama, would have never done. Elites in our country and throughout Western Europe in particular view the nation state as kind of passé. You really need to delegate sovereignty to international institutions. Not this president. He is America first. That does not mean you're not dealing productively for the rest of the world, but his job is to defend America's interests, and just as all those other countries' leaders' jobs is defend their country's interests.
Well, and delving even deeper into that, I mean, he went beyond the governments in many cases and was talking directly to the people, especially with respect to Iran, saying, you know, these good people deserve prosperity and freedom. He talked about Venezuela, too, where the people there, the revolution starts in the heart. He talked about the American Revolution and how it's up to the people to get what they deserve, not just about these rulers or the governments.
Well, with Iran, it's a very good point, because the Iranian regime is one of the most anti-American regimes of the last 30, 40 years. But the Iranian people really have a rich culture. They were much more successful between this Islamic theocracy took over. And I think we have a lot in common with the broad swath of the Iranian public. And I would say similar with Venezuela. His support for the people who are fighting Maduro's dictatorship has generally been good, much better than President Obama. And I thought today was very good. And for him to call out socialism the way he did, you know, for us, that's like normal talk. But for the United Nations, in front of all those bureaucrats, I thought it was tremendous.
Now, folks at home can't see this, but I could see you and Ambassador Bolton together watching this speech. Both of you had, at points, physical reactions to this. It seemed that this is a very different speech than you've heard at the UN in recent years.
Absolutely, and I think it's a speech that will resonate with middle America, because I think that you go there, a lot of times people will just say platitudes, and it's almost as if you lost 30, 40 minutes and you could have been doing something else. Well, here, he was speaking substantively, he was speaking directly, and I think he signaled really significant changes in American foreign policy. A lot of us in the Congress have been urging him to not recertify the Iran deal in October. I think it's hard to watch that speech and think that this is a president who's eager to recertify that. I think it's much less likely that that happens. And then also a president who's finally dealing with the problem of Kim Jong-un in North Korea. Other presidents have basically let this problem fester. This president doesn't want to do that.
Yeah, very direct talk from him today. Thank you for sticking around with us, Congressman Ron DeSantis. Great to have you with us today. Bill, back to you at the UN.
Shannon, you know, we're talking a lot about North Korea as a major focus coming into this speech here. And this is the line, this is the phrase now that a lot of people will pick up on. At the end, totally destroy North Korea. He made these comments about 20 minutes in. Watch and listen.
North Korea's reckless pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles threatens the entire world with unthinkable loss of human life. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
He went on to say that Kim Jong-un is on a suicide mission. This follows similar tough language from the president. We talked about fire and fury from several weeks ago. It's going to be a big story throughout the day as our coverage continues live at the UN here in New York City on This America's Newsroom. See you back here.